All right, so we're on page 167. We may finish this packet today. And I decided I was having so much fun with this material that we would just keep doing it forever. I thought briefly about switching topics, but I figured what could be better than this? At least for another 20 pages. We'll see how it goes after 20 pages. Anyway, so 167 is a new Mishnah. We started it last time, and we'll go at it again. So 167, I believe your packet only goes to page 169. So in case we finish, I have a new packet to hand out. This is chapter 9 of Baba Metzia. It's 105a with the Mishnah. So a person leases a field and doesn't want to weed. Okay, so now we're going to have a series of excuses that will go through the Talmud why the lessee may not want to, doesn't feel like it's justified to expect him to weed. So it's an imaginary dialogue between the lessee and the owner as to why the lessee may not be obligated to weed. And by reading these, it sort of sharpens our own understanding of why it's necessary. Because you can see no matter how brilliant the lessee is in formulating the arguments, the law is going to remain you have to do the weeding. And anybody that's done weeding in their life understands why the lessee may want to avoid that. Anyway. So he says to the owner, what do you care? What do you care as long as I'm paying you your rent? You're going to get the expected amount no matter what. So what do you care? What difference does it make to you? You're in it for the money. You're going to get the money. Okay. Ein shomin lo. Okay, so the Mishnah says you don't listen to him. Mipnei she'achol amar lo, because these are all imaginary conversations anyway. So the owner could then respond back, L'machara tayotzeh mimena, because tomorrow you're going to leave, meaning at some point you're going to leave. You're going to leave me with the field. Umalet lefanai asavim, and the field will be full with weeds at that point when you leave, and then I'll be stuck with a weedy field. Okay, so you are, and it's a general principle that you are in charge of upkeep. It's okay. In fact, it's proper for the owner to expect the lessee to have proper upkeep of the field, because one day that owner, that guy, that lessee is only there temporarily. He's going to leave, and the owner is going to be stuck with the field. Okay, and you'll see later the Gemara really focuses on that one thing. So making sure the field is in proper shape once the lessee leaves. Okay, that's the Mishnah. So remember, the Mishnah is just a set of laws. This is actually just one law here with an explanation. And the Talmud, the Gemara now, which you're going to read, analyzes and goes into more depth. As it happens here, the Talmud doesn't go into much depth, a little bit of depth. The Gemara here doesn't last very long. As one approaches the end of a chapter, the Gemara sections, which are the interpretations of the law, get shorter. The longer sections are always in the beginning of the chapter. That's just a stylistic idiosyncrasy of the Talmud. The longer explanations are always earlier in the chapter, and the easier material. So this is also relatively easy to understand too. Okay, any questions about the Mishnah?
Was there a single editor of the Gemara?
Well, in tradition, the tradition is there's two editors, Rav Ashi and Ravina. So they didn't leave notes. We don't know exactly how they did it, but there were two editors in tradition. There are two editors that are identified in the Talmud as being the editors of the whole thing, Rav Ashi and Ravina.
When did they live?
They lived in the year 550, around then. Rav Ashi was the teacher. Ravina was his student. And they apparently put it all together. Then there's the editor of the Mishnah was Yehuda Nasi, Judah the Prince, around the year 200. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Gemara. Iamarle. So now, again, this is an imaginary conversation. So a bunch of different reasons why the lessee may actually have a valid reason not to weed. So now he says to the owner, Levatar hachi karivna la. Okay, so I guess this assumes that the owner is going to show up one day and say, hey, what about all these weeds? And so the lessee can say, well, I'm going to do it later. It's classic, right? If you have a teenager. Yeah, I was going to do that. It's just not right now. I'll do it later. And the same sort of idea, what do you care? I mean, as long as it gets done, you're concerned, because you go back to the Mishnah, Your concern is that I not leave you with a field that's all weedy. So I'm telling you, I will follow my obligations. Just right now, it seems to be filled with weeds. So he says, I'll do it later. I'll do it after I plow. I'll do it. I've got my own time frame here. Don't nag me about it. So, Amarle. So then, and what we want to do is dispose of all these excuses, so the lessee understands that they have an obligation to have constant care of the field, not just whenever they feel like it, but there's an implication that they're going to be taking care of the field, which is weeding all the time. So the owner can say back, Chiti maliyata ba'ina. And so the owner says back, I need the good wheat. So the implication is that if you weed, W-E-E-D, it improves the quality of the crop. And remember that the owner is getting a percentage of the crop, whatever percentage they work out. So the owner is saying that percentage that I get, I want it to be good wheat, a good crop, and I can only guarantee that if you're weeding constantly. Now, what's interesting here is that what is the owner doing with his part of it? And we assume he's selling it, but he may not be selling it. Actually, maybe using it for his own table. We don't really know. But here it's like the implication is he's using it for his own table. I'm going to be eating it. And since I'm going to be eating it, I want it to be good. And weeding is necessary for that. Okay. So you need to be constantly weeding, not just to leave it for me, because I'm concerned with the crop itself. Okay. The Iamarle, Zavenana lachite meshuka. This is, then again, genius. Okay. You want the good wheat? I will buy that for you out of my own money from the shuk, and I will give it to you. So I mean, in your portion, I won't even give you this weedy stuff. I will go and I will purchase for you better stuff from the market. So this guy's willing to do anything not to weed. He will spend his own money on or he might just say, look, you're being a nudnik about this. I mean, you want good weed. It doesn't matter. The weeds. I'm imagining my teenage son arguing with me. So it doesn't matter if my room is clean. Right. Sorry. It doesn't matter if you weed or not. It doesn't affect the crop. But to make you happy, I will make sure I will purchase for you better wheat from the store, from the shuk, from the market, and I'm not going to weed, and I'll keep the bad stuff, and I'll sell the bad stuff. So I will compensate you. So it's a pretty good deal. You want good wheat? I guarantee it, and you don't need it for my weeding. I'll just buy it for you. Okay, Amarle. They use wheat, by the way, as just a generic for crops in general. It could be anything. It could be olives, whatever it might be. Obviously, wheat was a big product, at least in Babylonia. This is Babylonian. Okay. Amarle. So he says back to him, Chite da'arai ba'ina. And the owner can say back, no, I want the wheat from my own field. Which, by the way, is not logical. It's not. I mean, what difference does it make? He's eating it where it comes from, except that what it's saying is that the owner is allowed to have non-rational arguments here, because the owner has the right to expect the guy to take care of the field. So the owner is allowed to have sentimental attachments. I like my wheat. There's something about it that I like, and that's what I want. And therefore I need you to weed. And it's considered valid. Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to talk about logic and the renter is willing to spend money to satisfy,
yeah, I know, exactly.
Why doesn't he just hire somebody?
I know. They're trying to. So you can see what's happening by this sort of logic. You can see what's happening is they're trying to dispose of any possible argument that the lessee may have to not weed. They're just so there's not going to be any argument in the end. So they just want to dispose of all the possible arguments. And you wonder why this is all necessary. And part of it is because nowadays, with our reams of paper, and printers and things like that, we can put all this stuff in the contract, and we would make sure to put everything in the contract. Then, when they were barely writing things, there was a lot that was going to be assumed. So the Talmud is explaining why, even if it's not in the contract. Remember that you don't really have laws in these cases unless somehow it came before a judge. So it's sort of the judge's frame of mind and thinking, well, I know it wasn't in the contract, but anybody that leases a land understands they have an obligation to weed. And then you've got the clever lawyer on the other side saying, well, no, he was willing to buy, bringing up all these arguments. And in the end, you can see they don't hold any water. You just have to weed. Yeah.
So for the landowner, it's basically because I say so.
Because I say so. It's also because it's a justified expectation. And I think, that you can extrapolate from this to any form of leasing or even renting an apartment.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because really, it doesn't make any sense. But the renter could easily say, what do you care how I keep the apartment, as long as you get your rent? And the renter, by the way, could even say, no, I will guarantee you that I'll return it to you in good shape. But the owner can show up and find out that it's a terrible mess. And there's pets. So there's all these things that we would put in rental agreements that they wouldn't put in rental agreements, but it would be understood. And some of it, I suppose, is understood even if it's not in rental agreements. I mean, lawyers can correct me on that.
They may have understood agronomy to the extent that weeds are kind of a parasite.
Yes, I think they did understand that too. So we're going to get to that. Let's keep going. The EMR lay.
Weeds can sometimes be a help.
Right, exactly. So let's read the whole thing. EMR lay. Menakeshna lach shi'ur menatich. He said, okay, I will weed, but I'm only going to weed the crop that I'm producing. Okay, I'm only going to weed the little patch of field that I'm working. And that seems like a legitimate claim in some ways too. Weed only works here. You leased me the whole field, but I'm only going to work this part of the field. So I'm perfectly willing to weed the part, especially since you're so concerned about how it tastes. So I'll make sure that it's your wheat and it's done perfectly because I'm going to weed it, but only that patch of field that I'm working. And is that clear? Okay.
Are you saying that he only planted part of the field, even though he rented the whole field?
Yeah. And that could happen too. Yeah, I'm going to rent you the whole field, but you're only going to work one part of it. Maybe at some point. I was thinking about that. So why would you do that? First of all, because that's the deal the owner gives. The owner says, I'm not cutting this into parcels. I'm leasing you the whole field, and just because you're choosing to only work part of it doesn't mean that I don't think of it as all being your responsibility at this point. And also, from the point of view of the lessee, at some point, maybe he would use the other part of the field for other things. I mean, maybe there's a slope. There's all sorts of things. So it doesn't work for wheat, but maybe it would work for vines. So, but at this point, the lessee's only planning on planting wheat on one particular part of the field, and his argument might be, well, I should only have to weed the part. And it's not a crazy argument. It's not. You see, the Talmud will dispose of it, but it's not a crazy argument. I only want to weed the part that I'm working. It's even though I'm leasing the entire field, I don't see why it should be my responsibility to weed the entire field, because I'm not the only crop I'm providing for you out of our agreement is from this part of the field, so I'll weed that. Because remember, the arguments back have all been about the quality of the wheat. So this answers all those arguments. It says, okay, so you'll get the best quality, you'll get your wheat, and I'll just weed that patch.
But the owner's concerned about leaving the rest of the land to weed the following year. Yeah. He has a lot of work to do.
If he has it. Yeah.
Ready, so.
Right.
That's
right.
not
That's what I.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I assumed that the argument here was that if the lessee owns 1/3 of the crop to the owner,
he'll
plant the whole field,
right.
but 1/3 of the field he'll weed, so that the part you eat, the part you eat will come from a weeded part of the field. And I'm not going to weed the whole rest of it.
Oh, okay.
That's what I assumed from.
Yeah, you may be right about that. I didn't even think of it that way. I have to look at Steinsaltz, but
that's why I thought.
Okay, that may be true. I actually hadn't thought of it that way. It turns out not to really matter in the end because we. Maybe that's why I didn't think about it that much, because you dispose of that argument. It turns out not to be a good argument, but maybe that. So the stuff I give you, I'll weed that third. Okay, Harvey, we're gonna.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But also the weeds are taking nutrients potentially out of
the
soil.
Yeah. So we're going to get to that. You know what happens very often in the Talmud is they save the most obvious arguments for last. So, by the way,
So speaking on behalf of weeds in an area where the land is very dry, weeds can actually keep moisture in the soil. So weeds aren't necessarily all bad.
Yeah, and I think they're aware of that too.
Or the amount.
I think that they're aware. Because I think they had a very strong sense. I mean, this was their livelihood. So I think they had a sense that there were good weeds and bad weeds. Right. And that it wasn't as simple as the weeds taking up space. Remember, the end of the Mishnah says And the end of the Mishnah is important because it seems to encapsulate a lot. The end of the Mishnah says, my concern is that you will leave for me a weedy field. Now, what's the problem with a weedy field is that, well, first of all, you'd have to...
It would be very hard to plant a different crop.
Right. And it seems to me that should be the answer in the end.
Right.
Is that, are you taking care of the field enough that you're leaving it to me in good shape? And that's enough for the Mishnah. It's the Gemara that now invents other reasons why. It says, okay, I can take care of that. I will not leave you a weedy field. It's the harvest that the owner still has a right to be concerned about. Right. So one question that's going to come up is that, well, why didn't the Mishnah include all these other arguments? And why doesn't, because it would be easier if the Mishnah would just say, right, you got to weed the field. And also would say, like, once a week, whatever it might be. I have no idea what it would be. If the Mishnah would just say, you've got to weed the field, then the Gemara wouldn't be asking any of these questions because it would be 100% clear. The problem is the Mishnah gives a reason why you have to weed the field, and the reason it gives, it doesn't actually cover every possibility. So the reason the Mishnah gives is that I'm afraid as the owner I'm going to get a weedy field. So now that gives the Gemara a chance to say, well, what if in the end, he guarantees it won't be a weedy field, but in the harvest to harvest, he's saying, I didn't feel like weeding. So it responds to that, and then what you end up with the Gemara is that you have to weed the field. You have to weed the field on a constant basis. So the Gemara comes basically to correct what's a I wouldn't say a mistake in the Mishnah, but what the Mishnah leaves too big a loophole. So what the Gemara is doing right now, as we see, is closing every loophole. Because if you just read the Mishnah, you'd have a loophole. You could show up, and I hadn't been weeding, and I'll show you the Mishnah and say, hey, I just have all I have to do according to law is return to you a non-weedy field. What I do right now is none of your business. So the Gemara is taking care of that loophole. Yeah.
This is beginning to sound like mission creep. The purpose of renting the field was to produce some crop. And the secondary thing is to produce that crop, you have to keep the field kind of clear of weeds so that your crop is not reduced by the weeds. But now it sounds like the owner's goal is to have a nice field that you can rent to the next person. And that doesn't seem to be the job of the renter.
Well, they're saying it is the job of the renter to take care of it. It's sort of like when you rent a car.
Right, you return it in the same condition.
Right. And remember, that's actually the context that Baba Metzia.
Part of a car, you can rent. I mean, let's say he's only capable of growing crops at 100 units. And the owner has 150 units. So he grows 100 units worth of field, a crop. But then it sounds like if he has to weed the rest of it, that becomes a part of the deal, and it doesn't really seem like that was the original intent of the deal.
Yeah, although, I mean, the lessee always has the option of just not taking the deal. I'm not taking that deal. That's 150 acres, and I'm only going to work 100. And you're telling me after I have to take care of the other 50, I'll find another farmer that will rent me 100 acres. I mean, so if once you're renting once you make that decision to lease 150 acres, you are now in charge of taking care of 150 acres. You may not like it. You're maybe only going to be working 100 of it. So if that's the case, then rent from somebody else. But the owner has that right to expect that you're taking care of the entire thing. And that's what the Gemara is going through.
It's like renting a car. You mentioned renting a car. You can't go into a rental agency and say, I only want 1/4 of the car.
I'm not going to use the back seat.
I'm not going to use the back seat. Or what happens in the back seat's not my responsibility. I wasn't in the back seat. So, yeah. Well, you are, though. You're responsible for the back seat, too. All right, let's keep going. So the issue it comes to an interesting, not quite conclusion, but you'll see. Remember the argument is that I will weed the part of the field. So I was going to say the part of the field that I'm working, and Martha and Harvey suggest it's the part of the field that you get your crop from. Could be either, because the response is, well, if you do that, Amar le ka mansabat shemra la ri. Okay, you are giving my field a bad reputation. So if you're only weeding part of the field, and somebody drives by or walks by in their horse and buggy, whatever it might be, and they see what a weedy field, I will lose market value. No one's going to want to rent from me after that. So that's one of the reasons why, in a rental car too, you keep it clean and spiffy, so the next people will look and see, gosh, what a great car. and that way I won't lose market values. And that's a legitimate claim. That's what they're saying. That's a legitimate claim from the owner. You have to take care of it so it looks good, because I have a reputation to uphold. My field has a reputation. Yeah.
You could say if somebody's renting a house,
that
is the responsibility of the renter to paint the house so that it looks good for the next tenant.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the responsibility of the renter to So painting may not be considered basic upkeep. I think it probably is the responsibility. Yeah, it is the responsibility of the person who's renting to do basic upkeep. And I would say part of the reason is that to make the house.
I meant to say rentee, that the person who's doing the renting shouldn't be responsible for painting the house so that it looks nice for the next tenant.
No, but I would say painting and weeding are probably weeding is basic care. Weeding is taking out the garbage. It's not putting holes in the I think that's the to do extra probably is probably not a fair expectation. Yeah, that's interesting. Doing the lawn work is
in the house.
Yeah. And I don't know. Do rental agreements include? You got to take it. Probably they don't. Do they?
Yeah. Sometimes the landlord takes care of it. Sometimes the
right. I guess it depends. Right. It depends. Yeah. I don't know if there's like a common law expectation. If you rent a house, you got to take care of the. Yeah. Oh, okay.
What if the renter decided he wanted a chartreuse room and he painted the room chartreuse? Then he moves.
Right.
The owner doesn't want a chartreuse room.
All right, let's continue. So clearly we're not going to finish this packet today. But that's okay. V'hatnan. Okay, so now they go back to, and I said this is actually the problem. In Talmud, you call it the generative problem. Like, what's the issue that's creating the discussion? And now they said this is the issue. But wait a second, all this back and forth, we have very clearly in the Mishnah, Mipnei shemalet lefanai asavim. The Mishnah actually gives a reason why you are expected to weed, simply because the owner has a right to expect, once you leave, that the field is not weedy. Since that's in the Mishnah, which is the authoritative law, why are we going back and forth with all this with other types of excuses? Because we have the one excuse, and that should be the law. Okay, so and they're just bringing that up to show you, first of all, the origin of all the discussion, and second, why are we even diverting from the Mishnah? The Mishnah itself tells us the one excuse that the lessee could bring and say, look, I'll make sure. I'm sorry that the president, the owner could say, you have to weed because I don't want a weedy field when you leave. Okay, let's turn the page. Okay, and then it's Ella Mishum Marle, and this actually sort of becomes definitive. That's actually not it. That's the. Are you looking at the next?
This
is what's coming. Yeah, that's the.
This is today's.
Yeah, and that's interesting. The discussion ends with this, page 168. Ella Mishum Marle, because the owner can say to him, Bizra de nafal nafal, which is that the seeds of weeds will fall and ruin the field. Mm-hmm. So and that it's interesting. That becomes their final comment on the whole thing. The reason you have to weed and not wait till your last day, the last day when you're finally going to give up the field. So now I better do some weeding because I owe it to the guy. The reason you can't wait till the last day is because all those years you have the field, seeds from the weeds are going to fall, and you've ruined the field. So, in other words, this is a legitimate expectation that the weeds, and the Mishnah the Talmud is saying, we know this as farmers, that if you're not weeding, you're damaging the field. So it's simply the damage to the field, and all this stuff about I want the weed to taste good, I want my wheat. None of that actually is definitive. What's definitive is that if you don't weed, you're hurting the field. And I said before, sometimes you wait till the end to give the obvious. I think you mentioned this before. This is the obvious reason why you have to weed, because if you're not weeding, it's damaging the field. And that's not fair to the owner.
Weeds beget more weeds.
Weeds beget more weeds, yeah.
If you don't take out the weeds, you're going to have weeds.
Yeah, I was reading on the side of the background. It was basically, what we know is it's easier to get the weeds out when they're little weeds rather than big weeds.
Right. And that's not a big technological progress. We've known that for a long time. We human beings, not me personally. Actually, have very little knowledge about this kind of stuff. But human beings have, all of human history, right? We've been farming, so.
It's an interesting insight in this week's Torah. when Yitro advises Moses, about how to solve the problems of this litigious people.
With
all these different
judges. Yeah.
But the judges are not judges; they're lay people who are considered wise.
Right.
So it's based on a judge. All those lesser decisions are based upon judgments of ordinary people who you disregard, you can trust. There's no laws. There are no assigned.
Well, now the Mishnah is the law. So the Mishnah is people writing the law, and then the judges have to base themselves on the law.
Right, even the lay people have to base themselves.
Yeah, but
right. I mean, even in the Torah, there's a set of laws.
Yeah, but this discussion that's in the Gemara, they're not judges either. They're rabbis. Right?
The rabbis are judges.
They are?
Yeah, the rabbis are ordained judges. They're the ones who judge. Yeah. No, that's very clear.
Yeah,
I mean, the rabbis are right.
They're still winging it. With, let's say, applying practical wisdom, right?
They're winging it less than it might be in a less developed society. They have a law code. They have law codes, so they're basing themselves on law codes. First of all, they've got the Torah. Then the later rabbis have the Mishnah. So they're not quite winging it. I mean, they're winging it more than maybe a judge today who's got. Although judges today use their own discretion, right? Yeah. So it's probably not that different.
They have rulings and precedents. And
right. They just have a lot more precedents than yeah. What we're reading now is the process of really focusing in on what the law is and how it got that way. I've said before, the Talmud is not a book of law. It's a book about law, which is very different. The Mishnah actually is a law code, but the Talmud as a whole is a book about law, about how law develops and what the different possibilities and options might be. It's difficult to pin down from reading the Talmud what the law is. It's not difficult to understand a philosophy of law that develops in the Talmud itself, and an attitude towards law.
Right. So what's interesting is that this is a general idea of a relationship between a renter and the landlord,
right.
And it can be applied to other things than fields of wheat.
That's why we still study it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Let's keep going. We'll read the next Mishnah, page 168. Okay. So you lease a field and nothing happens. so the crop doesn't turn up. It's a bad field. And there's
bad weather this year.
Yeah, well, there's good intentions on both sides. Right. The owner felt like this is a decent field. The lessee, person who's leasing the field, felt like I have a good shot at this, and then just nothing happens. Okay, so what do you do? And it's actually pretty easy because 0% of 20% of zero is still zero. So if there's no crop, there's no crop. But what if there's something? And also, what if it's a multi-year agreement? So I'm leasing this field for 10 years. That's often an understanding that it's going to be a multi-year agreement. But the first year, nothing happens. There's no crop. Is the person who's leasing the field, the renter, allowed just to walk away? This field, you told me was a good field. It's not. So that's what we're dealing with right now. What happens? I'll just read it and we'll stop. Im yesh ba kedei lahamid kri. If there is a kri, so a kri is a unit of measure, which we're going to have to analyze, but it means literally a pile. So if there's a pile of produce, very inexact word, right? A pile. Mm-hmm. If there's a pile of produce, I'm going to keep reading, then I'll get back to it. Chayav l'tapel ba. Okay, that's a pile's a pile. So then you divide it, however you agree to divide it, and you stay on the field and you try again the next year. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says, "My kitzba bikri." So then Rabbi Yehuda, in the Mishnah itself, which generally isn't analytical, but you need a little bit more information. What's a kri? I want to tell you that the word kri actually appears in our morning service. The verb koreh means to dig, but it means to dig in the sense of digging a pit. It's only used, just like Eskimos have many words for snow, people that work in agriculture have many words for dig. It's not just one word for dig. So digging a pit is correct. It's the same word. A kri is the noun form, which means a pile, but it implies the pile of dirt that you get from digging a standard pit. What is that? I have no idea. I don't know what a standard pit was in those days. But the point is, we don't know now, and even Rabbi Yehuda is not sure. What do you mean by a pile? Because a pile could be tiny. It could be huge. What's a pile? So we have to spend some time defining a pile. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, my kitzba bikri. What's the amount of a kri, a pile? Ella im yesh ba kedei nefila. Okay, so now it's their first attempt to be more precise in understanding what a pile is. So it's enough that it's in the field, that you would have room in the field that it would be worth your while to sow again, to sow seeds again. So that's the pile. So actually they define it not so much in how big is a pile. They define it as if you were able to harvest enough that it would be worth your while to sow again, plant and sow again, then it counts, and you do what the contract demands, which is you divide it, and then it's a 10-year lease. So if you actually could put in a decent amount of work in sowing, then it counts, even if it's a disappointing amount. It's not what you expected. That's the risk you took, so you have to keep up with it. If it's less than that, and there's no room to sow at all anymore because there was no crop, then you can cancel the agreement. Okay, that's Rabbi Yehuda's definition. What we'll find out is that it's still a pretty inexact definition, because what does it mean to sow? I mean, what does it mean it's worthwhile to sow? How much space it makes it worthwhile? I mean, I could just throw a few seeds. How much of the field? Yeah. So we're going to need a better definition, but we'll get to that in the following weeks.
They understand a little bit about using